social equality and justice. And so for me, higher education in an institution certainly like this, which is so well known and so successful in preparing young people for future endeavors, is at the heart of how we continue to provide opportunity. And I think it's important to open higher education to as many students as possible, which I know is something that your government now is looking at, how to provide more state-sponsored institutions, encourage more private institutions. The thing that I think has historically been quite useful in the American system has been the variety of educational settings. So there have been technical schools that have provided education, skills training for specific occupations. There has been what we call community colleges, which are two-year institutions. And it's often the way people start. They then go on to a four-year institution, or it could be a terminal degree in practical nursing, for example. So having a variety of higher education institutions has provided us with a lot of flexibility and mobility. Now, I think as we in the United States look at higher education, we have to deal with the high cost. We have to deal with some of the problems of not only affording it, but going into debt in order to attend college or university, which is a big burden on many students and their families. So we have work to do to try to increase access and opportunity through which we can try to increase social mobility, equity, and justice. And here in India, I think you've got so many great opportunities to expand higher education, to reach many, many more students, because the level of aspiration, the willingness to do hard work is very apparent here.
Second, if you can, there is education and then there is employment, economics of that, and then there is this global narrative on sustainability and climate change. There are countries like India with huge populations, aspirational populations. How do you see these two being balanced so that a large population like ours, with a young crowd of students who's going out there in the world and wanting to do work, how do you see that climate change and sustainability should not be burdened on a country like ours?
Well, I want to tell you, to start, a story from my visit yesterday to the salt pans. Historically, it was totally an occupation that required human labor. Then it became an occupation that relied upon diesel-powered pumps to pump the water into these very large ponds, and then to have the water evaporate and leaving the salt behind. Because of the Self-Employed Women's Association, these women now working in the salt fields are using solar pumps. And the SEWA group helped them to buy the solar pumps. Now they are paid off. They've been using them for about, I think, 3 years, and their costs have gone down dramatically, so they're actually bringing more income back to their families, because the diesel pumps required constant diesel fuel, and they were at the mercy of the people selling the diesel fuel. Now, I tell you that story to give you one example of why I think alternative clean energy is India's future. I don't see it as a burden. The cost has dropped dramatically. The access, as I saw with my own eyes, to solar pumps out in the desert in Rajasthan is revolutionizing the opportunities that these women have to make a living, to send their children to school, to provide better housing for their families. So honestly, I believe that India is so well positioned. A few years ago, the costs were not competitive, and therefore it seemed like you had to sacrifice maybe on clean energy for economic growth. I don't think that is any longer the case, but it requires organization from the public sector, the private sector, and civil society, as I saw with Sewa helping to buy these pumps for the women. And I really believe that the opportunity for India in being a leader in clean energy is so dramatically available. And let me just make a few additional points about this, because historically it has been a trade-off in many different ways, predominantly economic. But today, with great institutions like this one, with the creative scientific know-how, bringing those costs down, decentralizing solar, because the other thing that happens with these women working so hard in these salt marshes, they work from October through April, then they take the solar panels and they take them to their villages and they use them to power electricity, to charge phones, to be available for other purposes in the village, and they even are entrepreneurial about it because they have the solar panel. They can charge a very small fee for charging a phone, for example, or for sharing electricity for lighting at night. So they're thinking very creatively. Now, if you can take a solar panel that's been fueling a pump out in the desert back to a village and help that village get access to more lighting at night so the children can actually study and read at night, that's the kind of virtuous cycle that driving the cost down, subsidizing it maybe on the front end, but then creating opportunities for that use. And there's even now an effort in some of the villages that are being served by these solar panels to sell excess energy back to the grid, or to create microgrids that cover a whole village or maybe the next village. So it's that kind of creative thinking that I feel like is very aspirational.
Thank you for sharing those wonderful examples and for sharing confidence. Careers need to assert themselves when confronted with circumstances that affect them adversely, both professionally and personally.
Well, I think that is a key question for any of us, and part of the challenge of dealing with adversity, being a woman or a man, but let's focus, as the question asked, on women, is developing enough resilience and confidence to go through the adversity. That does not happen overnight. I think it can be built in childhood and young adulthood. And it's important, in my case, I can speak personally, it's important to have parents who express confidence in you. I was the oldest of three. I had two younger brothers. My father was a very conservative, strong man. He had served in World War II in the United States Navy. But he never made a difference in terms of expectations between me and my brothers. He expected us all to do well in school. He expected us to learn how to stand up for ourselves. He expected us to be as responsible as possible. So I felt from a very early age that I was being given an opportunity to pursue my interests and to develop my own path in life. And certainly I had teachers who were very supportive of that, and all through my public schooling and my college and law school. So I think it starts when you're young, but it also requires constant preparation as you get older, as you are an adult, to deal with whatever life throws at you, and none of us know what that will be. In the workplace, it's important that other women support women who are being adversely affected, because, as we say, there but for the grace of God go I. And it's important that all of us, as women in professional or public life, realize that sexism and misogyny are still around, and sadly, it has become quite virulent on social media. And social media has been a terrible influence on how women in the public arena are viewed and treated. So we need to be especially resilient, but we also need to be supporting each other in the workplace, because there are new pressures in the social media world that we've never confronted before, and we have to support each other in doing so.
Thank you so much for those insights. We are sitting here today. 2 years back, it was very difficult to think of a situation where we wouldn't have masks in front of us. So we have a question from Vivek. Vivek is a graduate student in biological engineering. He asks, from your perspective, what are the key lessons and takeaways that COVID-19 has provided and left us with?
Well, Vivek, you sound like you would know more than I do about this as a graduate student in the biological sciences, but certainly, and I have a daughter. My daughter is a PhD from Oxford in public health, and so she has, if she were sitting here, she would have a lot to say, because she thought that the world was not prepared, and certainly the United States was not prepared. So I think there are several lessons to learn, because I do think we have to be prepared, especially with climate change creating new conditions that unfortunately are predicted to impact the mobility of all kinds of diseases. They'll be moving around the globe. They'll be moving from south to north. They'll be moving from east to west. So we have a lot to plan for, and I think there are several lessons. Number one, we have to have supply chains in our countries, in our immediate regions, ready and able to provide what we need. In the United States, as I'm sure you know, in the early weeks of the pandemic, I live in New York, we had no personal protective equipment. Our doctors and nurses were wearing garbage bags. They were wearing the same mask for weeks at a time, because we did not produce it anymore. And we were totally dependent upon supply chains that mostly started in China. So there was a lot of lessons learned about you cannot be reliant, dependent on faraway places like that. The other thing we learned is we have to do a much better job in communicating public health messages. There was a lot of uncertainty, which is understandable at the start of such a global pandemic, but we didn't really communicate effectively with large portions of our population. And again, we need smart, educated people who are studying these issues to help us know how better to tell people, guess what, we've now learned wearing a mask does make a difference. Yes, the vaccines are working, and India did a great job getting vaccines to market. The United States, primarily through Pfizer and Moderna, did a good job. Other countries didn't really figure that out as quickly as India and the United States did. But we have to have global responses, and we need, not to be worried so much about only what happens in our country, because given the world we live in, germs, bacteria, viruses do not stay across the border. And so we have to do a better communications, and every country, including and especially China, has to be more open and transparent in sharing information in real time. That's true for all of us, but because of the difficulties we had getting accurate, timely information out of China, they have to understand they cannot continue to hoard or guard information that the rest of the world needs. The final thing that I would say is part of what was shown is the collapse of a lot of the public health infrastructure. In our country, when the emergency hit, we didn't have enough, we didn't have enough oxygen, enough ICU beds. People were out in corridors waiting to be tended to. I read the same thing. I have good friends whose families are in India, same thing, hospital beds, oxygen. So we need to be smarter about how we prepare for what could happen again, to have enough access, affordable access to the care that people are going to be needing. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but I think the world should come together and try to cooperate about how we're going to prepare for whatever might come next.
Thank you. Speaking of communication and leadership, this next question is directed at you and something that you'll probably be able to answer very effectively. This is a question from Anawat Pandya. Anawat is a junior undergraduate in mechanical engineering. He asks, can you speak to the importance of taking time for self-reflection and introspection in leadership? And how do you make time for that in your life?
I think that's a very important question. We are living in such a fast-paced world, and we're being overstimulated by information as well as misinformation and disinformation coming at us from every direction. And I think it's especially important to shut off social media and your phone in order to have that time for reflection. What I like to do, I try to spend an hour a day, if I can. It's not every day, but as often as I can, walking in nature. I try to take walks, even if I'm in a city, but I love to get out into the woods or by water, anywhere that I can just think. And I don't listen to a podcast. I don't listen to anything. I just literally walk and breathe and look around me and think. And I've tried to do that, most of my adult life, and I find it incredibly relaxing and de-stressing, because the stress is what is such a danger to everybody. And whether you're a student or a faculty member or out in the public eye, you have to find ways. Maybe it's, exercise of some sort. Maybe it's hobbies. Maybe it's, the arts, whatever it can be, that can give you those moments, those hours that you need to try to de-stress. And, additionally, I think it's important to try to understand what's happening to children and teenagers right now because of social media. They are, in my view, and based on research that's being done, they are finding it difficult to understand how to live in the real world, because the world on their screens of their phones is not real. But when you're 10, 12, 14, 16 years old, your brain is not even yet fully developed, which doesn't finally happen until you're 25. And you are being inundated with all this stimuli. The result, certainly from studies in the US, is an increase in anxiety and stress and depression, and a lack of relationships, or, as the questioner was asking, time for self-reflection apart from the messages that social media is hammering you with. So I particularly worry about young people, and I feel like many of you who are here and getting this great world-class education, trying to understand the impact of technology and social media, not to do away with it, but to try to mitigate it. And I will end by saying, you know, there's a very a clear message that many of us have gotten over the years from the actual people who are the inventors of the technology, who are the creators of the social media, who are the designers of the algorithms, primarily in Silicon Valley, do not let their own children have very much screen time. There are contracts that the executives of tech companies sign with caretakers, babysitters, nannies, where they absolutely prohibit very much screen time. When I learned about that, and then subsequently it was validated, I thought that's so scary that the people who are inventing this new world know it well enough to want to protect their own children from it. So how do we protect all of our children? And how do we as adults separate ourselves from it enough to have that time for de-stressing, self-reflection, thinking that is so important?
Thank you for those tips and insights. One final question from a student. This is from Nikhil Shah. Nikhil is a senior undergraduate majoring in electrical engineering. He asks, what are your top priorities professionally at this moment, and what keeps you going?
Well, I am very committed to working with the Clinton Global Initiative, which is a program that my husband started back in the early aughts after he got out of the White House. And we brought it back this last September, and we have a number of terrific partners here in India who are all committed to projects that can have tangible, measurable outcomes to improve the lives of people. Like the Desai Foundation is one of our partners, and what I saw earlier this morning with students from here helping with doing pediatric checkups and testing and screening for things like diabetes. You know, I'm very excited about the work we're doing there. I've now become a professor of practice at Columbia University at the School of International Policy and Affairs, where I'm going to be working with students on global issues and looking for ways that we can help to make an impact on specific problems both in the United States and around the world. I have a podcast, which I enjoy doing because I get to talk to a lot of really interesting people. My daughter and I started a production company called Hidden Light, which produced the series we did on Apple TV Plus called Gutsy. I just have a portfolio of a lot of different work, but I'm here in India, as I said at the beginning, to continue work that I've done for nearly 30 years with a NGO, the Sewa group, because I believe in the work trying to lift up people and provide better opportunities, because I think it's not only good and fair for the people affected, but I think it raises the living standards and quality of life in villages, communities, and finally in countries. You know, there's a lot of good research comes out of places like the World Economic Forum, Goldman Sachs, the OECD, etc., which really talks about how the more women are empowered to be full participants in society and in the economy, the more economic growth, the higher the standard of living, the better for children who are then more likely to be educated and go much further in education. I just think that that's part of the global challenge that we all should face, because it makes a big difference, and it would be, a real joy for me to continue working on these issues for the next years and to make whatever difference I can.
Secretary, and you have spared time from an immensely hectic schedule